Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Congregational Church of Langsburg's online service. Thank you for joining us here in this digital space. My name is Ellie, and I'll be your host for Easter Sunday. You can check in and let us know you are here by saying hello in the comments below. You can also share anything we need to hold space for there, and our community will remember you in our prayers. Today is the first Sunday of Easter, which is an 8-week season which explores the resurrection of Christ and the significance and meaning that has on our world today, and our responsibility toward the world as the people of God. And to help us explore, we have a few poems, prayers, and readings for us along the way. Blessings on the journey.
Good morning. It's a beautiful day to be outside and a blessing to be with you this morning with our reading, which is Psalm 91 retold by Malcolm Guite. He shares our grief and wipes away our tears, and even in this life he shelters us beneath the shadow of his wings. Our fears and hopes are known to him. His faithfulness will be our shield and buckler. We can trust his constancy and know that he will be with us through the best and through the worst. I may be threatened by the passing harm of outward pestilence, but still I trust. He gives his angels charge with his arm. He shelters and embraces me. No power can separate me from his love. His name is my protection and delight. I pour my heart and soul to him in songs and psalms, and he will bring me through my darkest hour.
The light which the world tried to extinguish cannot be put out. Today we light the candles again, proclaiming the transforming power of God. As the light returns, we give thanks that God's transforming love has been, is now, and will ever be at work within and among us. Today we celebrate new life, new joy, new possibilities. Christ is alive and living among us.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain of injustice in the world to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of equity and fairness.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain of injury done to the earth and its ecosystems to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of creative and responsible caretaking of our home.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain of violence in the world, and to the earth to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of powerful peace, grounded in self-sacrificial love.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain caused by the lack of basic needs, food, shelter, education, healthcare, and love, to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of responsible compassion for the vulnerable.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain of war and oppression in the world to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of nonviolent resistance that desires the redemption of all humans back to the way of God.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness and pain of illness and disease in the world to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of responsibility toward and solidarity with those who suffer in mind, body, and or spirit.
Go.
We light this candle in the midst of the darkness. In the midst of the darkness.
And pain of all the children of the world who suffer, to declare that Christ has given us a different way to live that transforms the world, one of courageous responsibility and creative compassion towards those most in need.
Mom, where's the green ball? I think that one's broken.
We acknowledge that there is still pain and suffering in the world. but we place our trust in God and in the way shown by Jesus Christ. In the midst of darkness, there is light. In the pain of death, there is life. In the face of what appears to us to be overwhelming odds, God is at work in us and in the world, working for justice and peace, compassion and love, and life abundant. Christ is risen.
Good morning all, and welcome to the first Sunday of Easter. This is a time of new beginnings, fresh starts, and revived life. Now, Easter is the proclamation that death has been defeated and that love proved more powerful than violence, hatred, betrayal, fear, and all like these that systemic power would ask of anyone who desires inclusion into its worldly prosperity and protection. Now, the disciples did not understand this, which is why their actions and attitudes towards Jesus are very antagonistic when he talks about his crucifixion and coming death. They believe, like most of humanity, that the one who dominates these tools of power, like violence, fear, domination, coercion, and manipulation, is the one who dominates the world. They are the ones who decides who lives and who dies, who scrapes by and who thrives. So we grasp for these tools ourselves, or trust in one who will wield these tools with our particular interests in mind, if you know what I'm saying. Now, these worldly powers demanded subservience and conformity as the avenue to gaining freedom, and they threatened anyone who questioned this authority with death. Good Friday is the story of human systemic evil, both religious and political, following its own protocol to the extent of condemning God's Son to death for blasphemy and treason. Now, the worldly systems of power declare that God was neither holy enough for the religious or obedient enough for the kings. And so he died at the hands of proper etiquette and codes, though many along the way declared his innocence. But they are all enslaved to the systems that they operate within, as well as the crowd's cries for crucifixion. Just like in Lord of the Rings, the one who pursues power ends up enslaved to the One Ring that rules them all and made them all. But the radical, self-sacrificial love of God places these powers on display for what they are, by walking directly into their clutches and having the whole worldly system fall upon him, crushing him in death, though perfectly innocent. But Christ, obedient to the greater law of God's love, enters death as the perfect human being, overcame it, disarmed it, and resurrected from the dead, offering this new life of God's love to all of us, who could never obtain it through our own efforts. So Easter is the declaration that death has no power left, thus rendering the worldly powers without arms to threaten us and make us afraid. This is how the early church understood what Jesus had done, and how they endured much persecution and martyrdom. They embraced this hope. So while we still die, death has lost its sting, and death has become the doorway into what John calls eternal life, or the life of the end of the age brought up into the present through the work of Christ. And this life and love of God is offered to the world as the way out from the systemic evils that we are entangled with. That seems to be a lifetime's task, if you ask me, and this is where faith comes into play. Christ's death can count for ours, Christ's life can count for ours, and Christ's resurrection is offered to us. Now, the powers are still in operation, death still happens, oppression is still in existence, and John's gospel account of the resurrection takes all of this into consideration when it says in the opening lines, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Christ resurrected. Now let's hear this passage read, and we shall explore some of its implications on the other side. See you in a minute.
John 20, verses 1 through 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple that Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken away my Lord," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father, your Father, to my God, your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her.
Now, I'm a big fan of memes, those little cartoons with funny or thought-provoking sayings on them that make their way all over the social medias. Now, one popular one comes from a Casey Green comic that features a dog sitting at a table with a cup of coffee, but the whole house and room is on fire around him, and the talk bubble above his head says, "This is fine." Now, while coffee can really help most situations, it is just not going to work in this one. Now, sometimes it feels like Easter is in danger of living out that meme in church. You know, we get together, we sing the songs, we say the prayers, and we get really inspired and happy and leave our Easter Sunday services for our ham dinners back at home with family without really ever acknowledging the state we are in as a people and as a world. So this year seems difficult to proclaim Easter message. It just feels like the whole world is on fire and not getting better, and people are just like, "This is fine." There seems to be a lot of angst and anxiety and anger flooding our feeds and screens and lives. Now, this is one of the reasons I enjoy the liturgical calendar. Easter is not one and done happy clappy Sunday, but an 8-week journey. And not just an 8-week journey, but it's a part of the entire journey we've been on since Advent back in December, where we walked through Advent and Epiphany and Lent, and now we did Holy Week, and it flows into Easter and then off into Pentecost. So yes, Easter is a celebration of the resurrection of Christ from the dead, but it is rooted in much more than just bypassing our actual lives or superimposing something foreign and religious upon our world. Easter grows up from the grounds of the life you live and the world you inhabit, and then produces something for you today. And that's what the liturgical calendar does for us. It reintroduces these topics to us over and over again. Now, today's text starts with a phrase that should stop us all in our tracks, especially if we're on the happy clappy train to our ham dinners. It says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary found the tomb empty." Now, this small detail should not be overlooked. The Greek reading actually says, "while darkness was still in being," or still in existence. This is not merely stating the time of day. John always uses these details that communicate something more. Now, he talks about darkness 8 times in his gospel, and he contrasts Jesus as light of the world against that backdrop. Now, the resurrection of Christ is not a denial of the darkness of this world. The resurrection of Christ is not a total and utter victory of an utopian light that finally has set everything straight. Our lives are evidence of this not being true. Darkness still exists all around us and even within us. And we don't have to bypass acknowledging it in order to be a person of faith. In fact, the resurrection happens in the midst of the dark, in the midst of your life, and in the midst of my life. The one you actually live, the one you actually have. And the first Easter happens in the dark, within a graveyard, with only one faithful woman disciple attending to her beloved friend. So if that sounds like a description of where you find yourself, this Easter comes to you there. So let's read on and see what happens next. Now let's remember that the events of this chapter are taking place within the same weekend as the Good Friday crucifixion. The male disciples of Christ had their heads full of ambition, victory, prominence, and power, and they were expecting Christ to lead a military defeat of Rome and then establish them as the new heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. Why else would he have chosen 12 disciples, right? But Jesus has been telling them about his coming death and crucifixion the whole time, and they just don't get it. Now, to be fair, there was not really a template about thinking of the resurrection as something that could happen before the end of time. For them, crucifixion meant failed Messiah. They've seen it come and go over and over again. It was quite common. And they've already been through this a few times, probably in their lifetime. So when Mary brings the message of Christ's tomb being empty, and then they run, they're probably having some flashbacks of conversations and teachings that are now just starting to make sense. Now the text tells us that John reaches the tomb first, and then Peter goes inside first, and they see the grave clothes of Christ without the body that they used to hold. Now we don't really know a whole lot about Jewish burial process and customs of the time to divert into some of my nerdy, curious questions of these details, so we're going to have to focus on something else today. Now some of you just breathed a sigh of relief because you're like, nerd boy is going to calm down on me today. Now the two disciples that followed Jesus closely, that were a part of the inner three that witnessed the transfiguration, they don't see Jesus. And they're not going to see him until later in the evening. But they do believe, even though the next phrase says they don't understand that Jesus had to rise from the dead. But they believed without understanding. And then they left without ever seeing Jesus that Easter morning. Now, if Easter finds you here, staring into the empty tomb of your life and wondering, where in the world is Jesus? You're in good company. Because you don't have to believe within this vacuum of your individual understanding. Hey, maybe that comes later, I don't know. But there are those who can carry you. For there's someone else who stands with them there at the tomb. She hasn't been mentioned yet, but it was Mary. She stayed outside. And her faithfulness carries these disciples through, for she's going to remain at this tomb, and she's going to be the one that sees Jesus, and she will be the one that brings that message back to them. So let's check out that section next. Now, to be honest, I am not all that great at math. It's not my favorite subject. My brain can do it, but you might see smoke coming out of my ears whilst I math away. Now in college, I actually saved Math 101 until my final semester, and then I passed with a C. I'm not so sure I ever worked so hard for a C in all my life, but one thing I learned is that if you get something wrong early in the equation, it's going to affect your answers that come later because you're going to be using the wrong numbers. Now this concept is something that John wants to take on in this passage. Now how? Let's explore it just a little bit. Now Mary did not go into the tomb when the other disciples did. She waited outside. But she lingers after the other disciples leave. When she stoops to look into the tomb, she sees two angelic beings who greet her with the question, "Why are you crying?" Now her response is, "They've taken my Lord away and I don't know where he is." Often that's how Easter starts, in the dark, wondering where Jesus is and all that's going on in our lives. But the next thing is the first resurrection appearance of Christ. Now Jesus repeats the question. He was standing behind her and he asks, "Why are you crying?" Immediately followed by a second question, "Whom do you seek?" And I love her response because it just shows her strength and grit in the face of sorrow. She says, "If you took him, tell me where he is. I'm going to go get him." So Mary is totally ready to go and get the heavy dead body of her friend and single-handedly carry him back to his resting place, wherever he is in this vast city. Now may we have enough grace to show this kind of faith and tenacity in the midst of our hardships, right? Now there's two words here that have, as my friend Dan Marcelly says, Old Testament hyperlinks attached to them. They're colored differently than the rest of the text. Remember when you go on Wikipedia and you see things that are colored blue, you click on them, they'll take you to a whole separate page. Now, if you click on these two words within this context, they're going to take you all the way back to Genesis 2. Now, the origin story of this culture talks about a gardener named Adam, whose name means man, and then a partner alongside him, Eve, who her name means woman. And they dwell in the Garden of Eden. That's part of the equation. And that's where everything went wrong, according to their stories. So Christ coming to a woman in a garden and being confused for a gardener tells us that Christ has gone back to set something right in their narratives. And when Jesus calls her by name, then she recognizes him and calls him beloved teacher. And he sends her back to the other disciples. And she says, I have seen the Lord. So there is enough room in the Easter story for you and wherever you find yourself. If you're staring into the empty tomb of a life, or if you have had an encounter with the risen Christ, you are represented here and included in the narratives. So let others' understanding and belief carry you. If you find yourself in a place of understanding and belief, then don't look down on those who aren't there with you. Instead, let your faithfulness to what you have been shown carry those who need to be carried. We don't have to be trapped into this vacuum of individual knowing all the time and understanding and believing. The message here is that we are in this together, and Christ is risen.
And now for our benediction. A prayer for those who enter so deeply into Holy Saturday that they have difficulty moving so soon into Resurrection Sunday. By David Rice. Today we say, He is risen, but tomorrow we doubt that He is. Today we say the tomb is empty, but tomorrow we need more proof. Today we say He's alive, but tomorrow we act like He is dead. Forever. We need you to be the God of resurrection today. We need you to be the God of resurrection tomorrow. We need you to be the God who never gives up on us, even when we don't believe, even when we give up on ourselves, even when we give up on you. Come into our lives in such a way today that it causes us to live all things new tomorrow. Today we say, He is risen. Tomorrow, help us with our unbelief, and we will be grateful forever. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope this service has been a blessing to you. What now? 1. You can participate. If you'd like to participate in our services, we would welcome your readings with a simple phone reading. 2. Partner. If you would like to give financially to ensure the continuation of this online service, there's a link at the bottom of your screen. And 3. Subscribe. You may subscribe on YouTube or like our page on Facebook to stay updated with our online services. We hope you have found some hope, help, and healing today. See you next week.
All right, here we go. Good Friday and Easter Sunday. So we grasp for these tools. Oh, I can do it. Like, violence, fear, denomination. You right there. You can do this. It was neither holy enough or religious enough. Nope, wasn't it? One who dominates these tools of power, like violence, fear, denomination, I said it again. 5 screw-ups in a row. 5. But I got this one. Now, one popular one comes from a Casey Green comic that features a dog sitting at a table with a cup of coffee and a little talk bubble over his head saying, "This is fine." Well, but his house is on fire. forgot to include that. Good thing I caught that one.